welcome everybody to this Wednesday's edition of the weekly Route Consultant webinar and open Q&A session. We're so excited to have you guys here this week to join us. We've got some fun stuff to talk about. The first thing I'm going to do just briefly is read you a quick disclaimer, and then we'll dive into the content, tell you a little bit about what we're going to do here today. Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation and FedEx Ground. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation or FedEx Ground. Essentially, all that means is that you guys are not going to hear any materially non-public information here today that you could use to trade FedEx's stock upon. But we do hope that you will hear materially helpful information here today on the Route Consultant weekly webinar. We do these every week live just as an opportunity to engage with the community, answer some of the common questions that we're hearing from both prospective investors and current contractors, to talk about what's happening in the market, what's happening in the world, and the day-to-day operations of FedEx contractors. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Annalee Cate. I'm the VP here at Route Consultant. We are the industry's largest FedEx route broker and independent business consultant. On our operations side, we are also the largest individual FedEx route operators, meaning we move a lot of cardboard for FedEx Ground each week. So that's what we're here to do today. I've got a fun guest joining me here in just a moment. And basically the plan for today, for those of you that are new, is we're going to do content for about 15 or 20 minutes here, and then we're going to open the stage up for open Q&A. So for those of you that have questions, whether it's about today's topic or anything that you have questions about, feel free to submit those. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A feature. I'm going to be managing that Q&A feature today and answering those questions for you guys as they come in. But if you'll post them in the Q&A feature, I can only manage one screen at a time, so I'll be watching that. I'm not going to watch the chat feature. So just make sure for me that you use that Q&A button at the bottom. But you will know, if you've ever been to a Route Consultant webinar, we like to keep these interesting. So we have some rules of engagement here at Route Consultant, that if you are going to ask a question on our weekly webinar, you have to also answer a question. So we do a question of the day each week. And this is just, again, a way for us to learn more about you, have a little bit of fun. This is not your average infomercial webinar. So today's question is going to be, what animal are you most afraid of? So is there any, creepy crawlies or whatever it is for you that's an animal that gives you the heebie-jeebies? We want to hear about it. You're going to hear from me on my least favorite, most scary animal. You're also going to hear from our guest today. So our guest is Butch Butler. He is one of our regional sales directors here at Route Consultant. Butch and I have worked together for years, and he has single-handedly facilitated the entrance and exit of many FedEx contractors in this space over the last several years, and is now leading the charge for us, helping other contractors exit the space, helping our brokers bring new contractors into the space. And so he is a wealth of industry knowledge, and we're going to talk a lot about what we're seeing in the market today, trends, some of the lessons that we hope we can share with some of you to spare you some of those questions. But if you have questions about buying, about selling, or anything about what's happening in the market today, Butch is living this every day and working with contractors all across the country, dealing with some of those challenges. A lot of you here on the webinar probably know Butch. You may have talked to Butch this morning for all we know. So we're going to have a great time here today. But before we kind of dive into questions, I wanted to ask Butch some questions for you guys and help basically just frame in kind of where the industry is today, actually on the buying and selling side. So Butch, tell us a little bit more about you. I'm so happy to have you on the webinar this week. And then I'll launch into some questions for you. So tell us about your RC journey.
Thank you, Annalee. Thank you. And welcome, everybody. I'm really honored to be here. And so this is a fun one for me. I had the pleasure of joining Spencer and Annalee at Route Consultant almost a handful of years back now. And it has been very fun to work with this team and build this business. And this space has changed so much. What we've learned over the last few years has just been wonderful. So I'm happy to share some of the things I've learned and seen change in the industry. And that's a little bit about my background and me. I before working with Annalee and Spencer, my background was in investment banking in various different roles. So when the brokerage was started, it was a real natural fit for me with my brokerage background to come in and see if there was a role that I could play here. And it's been just wonderful.
Awesome. Thanks, Butch. So let's do exactly that. Let's talk about some of the changes you've seen. So, obviously in even just the last 3 years, pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID, it's been, a crazy journey and a crazy adventure. But, even though we had those, macro events happening in the world around us, it's also just been a really dynamic time in the space and the industry and in this ever-changing business. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit, Butch, just about from your lens, what are some of the major changes that you've really seen in the last few years for contractors, for these businesses? What are some of the things that really stand out?
Okay. Well, there is a bit of an exhaustive list. I mean, I think there's 4 or 5 that we really can focus on here today. So, I kind of start with FedEx itself, and the customer, because I've seen the customer evolve in terms of its expectations around the sophistication of new contractors, the expectations around what new contractors should become coming to the table with in terms of preparation and readiness. There's been a pretty significant rise in what FedEx is looking for someone to enter this space, and whether that's the expectations around growth and capital or the knowledge around what these people bring. But it is a serious increase over the last few years in terms of what FedEx has for expectations around new contractors. I think that's really meaningful. And that's something that we've evolved with, and part of what we've done here over the last few years is try to educate people coming into this space and helping people get as prepared as possible to be as successful as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. We've really, really seen that change. And, I think, but we're producing now, y'all certainly coming into this space. If you've watched even any of our content, even any of just our free YouTube content, leaps and bounds more than we did, obviously, when we were getting started in the space. So, that's definitely part of the benefit of working with us, is just the lessons we've learned the hard way, the money we've wasted, the tears we've shed, the blood that's been spilled.
Yes.
To build the operating side of these businesses. But that's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the market too, Butch. So in terms of valuations, supply, number of businesses on the market, what have you seen just trends wise over the last 3 years there?
Well, both of those have changed dramatically in the past few years. I mean, it was not uncommon for us to see these businesses trade hands in valuation ranges of 2.5, 3 times. For a normal, healthy operating business, we've seen those valuations drift up pretty materially now, to where for normal, healthy operating businesses, it's very routine for us to get multiples in the 4 to 4.5, sometimes even higher range. So valuations have gone up dramatically in the last few years. Oddly enough, because you usually don't see it this way, but the supply of options and opportunities is also up dramatically. So even with the valuations rising, we've seen a massive increase in businesses that are available for sale as well. And it's like these businesses have grown so much over the past few years that if you were operating a set of 5 or 10 zip codes last year, 10 zip codes 3 years ago, your volume has probably doubled or tripled in the last 2 or 3 years. And it's causing contractors to say, look, if I look out another 3 to 4 years, I know my business is going to double again. So I need to peel off a series of these zip codes and sell a portion of my business. And that has led to a significant increase in the number of opportunities in the market for buyers as well, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so fascinating because, we get that question a lot just in terms of the supply. And, basically when you look at our website, or look at the market, there's obviously a lot of opportunities available. And so, people will ask us all the time, oh, is this just every contractor selling? And it's fascinating, but no, it's actually a very small percentage of contractors that are actually turning over. It's just, as Butch is saying, that amoeba type effect where they're selling off pieces of their businesses to raise capital and really just to keep up with growth has certainly added an insane, influx of new opportunities in the last several years. So
yeah, there's no question. Most of the people that we raise capital for, they end up retaining a portion of their business. So, people are not really exiting this space, Annalee. There's a lot of people entering this space, and people who are in it, most of them are just getting a little bit smaller to right size their business for what they see as the next 2 or 3 years wave of growth that's coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question here, Butch, is when we think about operating these, right? So, a common question that we get as contractors is, can they be run remote? How do you run these remote? Obviously we have seen a dramatic change over the last several years in, the ability to kind of outsource, different components of the business. But I'd love to hear you just elaborate a little bit on that and kind of what you've really seen boots on the ground, for contractors in terms of that change of what's available and how easy or hard it is to operate.
There's been a real explosion in terms of third-party vendor relationships and businesses that are now available to help contractors that simply were not there 3 or 4, 5, 6 years ago. So the technology providers in particular you've seen massive strides in the available technology to run these businesses. Ground Cloud, Beans Routes, some of these businesses weren't even in existence a few years ago. So the technology side that's available is really hard to emphasize how much it's changed. Regarding running the businesses remotely, every one of these options or operations can really be run remotely. If you put the infrastructure in place to run your business in a remote fashion, you're going to have people doing some of the things that you would normally do if you were in the terminal, but you can certainly do that. And I see it across the spectrum all the time with people running these businesses remotely. The vendor relationships around hiring, and this is something we could spend a significant amount of time talking about. The labor market and the changes in the labor market have led to significant increases in third-party providers of hiring and screening and the driver side of getting people through First Advantage and the approval side. So all of those things that can be very time consuming can now easily be outsourced. And Bright Flag, as you know, is one of our solutions, and there's a lot of solutions out there. But those are things, frankly, that it was just really hard to outsource some of that hiring, the labor market things a few years ago. The technology wasn't available. So there's been massive changes in vendors who've come into this space to help contractors.
Yeah, I know. And I can speak that one just personally too, of the experience. We kind of didn't outsource, immediately outsourced everything. And it is amazing that the option there to have so many of those different infrastructure pieces and the pressure that it takes off of new operators, and you can always go back, but it's a very different experience, when you're trying to kind of treat it like that one-man show, or one-woman show. Like I think, 3 years ago, like it was like that for so many contractors, where they were processing the payroll and screening the drivers and managing First Advantage and doing the bookkeeping and and everything else you can imagine, and cutting DRO. And I mean, it's just, it's the laundry list there. Of truly feeling that 24/7, 365 grind, versus at least being able to leverage some solutions for that today. So I think that's a really good one too. And, as we're talking about kind of vendor solutions, also curious, can you talk a little bit about that journey that we've seen with financing? Because obviously that has changed dramatically over the years as well.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when we started a few years back, it was kind of like from a financing perspective, we were told that you can't do deals with the SBA. Conventional banks won't lend on these businesses. That's the message we heard routinely and repeatedly across the country. And we have gone through a lot of lending relationships and a lot of banking introductions to finally put together a group of people who we have confidence in and who help us do these deals from a financing perspective. So not every deal will find itself bankable, quote unquote. But having said that, we've really blazed new trails in what is the financing opportunities that are available for these businesses and new contractors.
Absolutely. I think it has been a huge change. Carve outs, as with the splitting of the businesses, has introduced a whole new level of complexity to that. And, we are starting to see some banks that have some ability to even, decipher through that. But the constant evolution and innovation, in the banking space, the third party side there has, I think, dramatically opened up that buyer pool in terms of, what businesses you can buy if you're, trying to be strategic with the amount of capital that you're allocating. So
yeah, it's hard. I mean, a year ago, we were really hoping and really thinking we could educate banks on how to do a carve out. And now 12 months later, we've got a few of them that, for the right businesses with the right opportunities, we can actually do them. And it's not broadcast that we can do every business as a carve out, but there are opportunities that exist now that didn't even exist 12 months ago. And we've had success with those carve outs. So we continue to make a lot of strides on the financing side of these businesses too.
Yeah. Yeah. The next thing as we kind of talk about, or any other like major, would you say like kind of critical changes besides what we just covered there, Butch, that, you think are really noteworthy, I guess, before I transition over on just the last few years? Anything else that really jumps?
I think that's a pretty good list. The only thing I would add, Annalee, is we've gone through this period of scarcity of trucks, and that frankly wasn't the case a handful of years back. So we've seen that shift in the market too.
That's a great one. Okay. So the next kind of topic I want to transition to is sort of from the perspective, right? You have, both personally and now, leading a team of brokers that all day are essentially shepherding, contractors through the process of selling their business, which is not easy. It's not a fast process. It's a complex process, and then helping new buyers come in, learn the space from the grassroots, so many coming with no transportation experience, no FedEx experience, to learn this space and then get set up to get through FedEx Ground's interview process, get approved, and then still, get functional to operate before closing. I want to talk through some of the kind of either lessons learned or, what you wish they all knew coming into it. So let's talk about the buyer side first. So as kind of prospective buyers that here might be watching and thinking about getting into this space for the first time, what are some of the things or kind of the big thing that you're like, I wish they all could I could snap my fingers and they all knew this before they, called our team and started that buying process?
Yeah, there's a couple of them that we can focus on. The first one that I think I would like every buyer to really understand is the number of moving parts in these businesses. It's really easy as a buyer to look at a business from 20 or 30,000 feet, see one of our prospectuses where you see the fleet list and you see the humans who are driving the trucks and operating the business. And that's the mental picture that you get of that business. And it's hard to understand how that static perspective is really so incorrect relative to what contractors deal with on a daily basis. There's nothing static about these businesses. There's moving parts on a daily basis with different trucks and different people and different boxes. And so from a buyer's perspective, I want them to understand the complexity around the moving parts of these businesses and understand that if you start looking at a business today, this is a 3 to 4 month process. The business you buy may not look exactly like the business you started looking at. You may find that the BC changed and is gone, that 2 or 3 of the trucks have been wrecked, right? So it is just one of those things that you have to understand how a static view of these businesses is just not really appropriate. It really isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can relate. And, and it's amazing too, how many, new buyers I think will come in just off a click on a website and say, this is the business. And, before they even dive in, sometimes it's not that business. And then when it is that business or it's a different business, it's a completely different, like you said, fleet of drivers, and it's a completely different set of trucks. So you definitely have to be able to roll with the information and be agile, for sure in this space, just to keep up. And I think
that's exactly right. That's what contractors do all the time. And so buyers need to adopt that mentality early. That is, I'm even going through this process. I know if I want to be a contractor, that's the mindset I need anyway. So let me just take it on the front end.
Yeah, that's a great one. What would you say in terms of, so kind of, we wish they knew that, what would you say is maybe the hardest part of the process for a buyer, whether it's the most frustrating piece or just the most challenging part for a buyer?
The timeline. I think it always takes a little longer than people would like. And even when these go well, oftentimes your buyers have made mental and sometimes physical changes in their life and mindset that it just can't happen fast enough. I mean, we see buyers move to a city to own a business. We see them quit their jobs. We see them make large investments in time and money. And as you start going down that road, it's just hard to make it happen fast enough in a buyer's mind, because that's what you want. This is your dream. This is really what we're shooting for, and everybody is, right? So why are we waiting another 2 weeks? Butch, come on, let's do this. And so the mindset around, there are so many different elements of the process with FedEx that take a handful of days to do, that you would think you could just press a bunch of buttons and this would be done in a week and a half, but you need to adopt the mentality of this is going to take 6 to 8 weeks, like it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think those are definitely common ones that we hear, and you could probably play in your head these conversations, that you've had a million times. But let's kind of jump over and talk sellers for a little bit. And I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A today for anybody that has questions for you. But on the seller side, Butch, what would you say that I wish every seller knew this, like coming into the experience, coming into the process?
Again, timelines is a critical one, because when sellers come to us, they've already made their mindset that they really are ready to do something different. And again, at that moment, it's already, we're not thinking about it anymore. I'm ready. I'm going to do this. Right. So us moving and getting a listing live and getting everything ready from a compliance perspective so that we're actually marketing the business accurately and appropriately. Sometimes that's part of the seller's mindset of, why is it taking you an extra week or two here? I really just want to get this done. So that I like. I also think that sellers, as they think about how they want to approach their businesses, I tell them all the time, run your business like you're going to keep it. And if you do that, it will be in the best healthy operating shape to sell it. And I think some sellers fall into the trap of, I don't want to buy another truck right now. I'll just go ahead and rent because I'm selling the business. And I think that that's a mindset that if I could get sellers to get away from, your business will be most valuable if you run it like you're going to keep it, and make your decisions like you're going to keep your business, because that's what's going to keep it healthy.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. It's such a good one. And then, just the kind of from a challenge perspective. So from a seller's perspective, what would you say, the hardest part of the process, for a seller of going through a sale and an exit? What would you say the hardest part of that process is?
There's a fair amount of time sifting through deal structures and buyers and finding the right person to work with, and then getting it under contract. And some of those, even the legal side of it, and getting a business under contract, going from an accepted offer to a legal transaction that both sides agree to. Sometimes that can be a little bit frustrating for sellers. So I counsel them to have flexibility. There are going to be attorneys in this process. There's going to be a little bit of money in this process. So know on the front end that you're making an investment in this process. So on the back end, everybody is buttoned up and appropriately protected. So the timeline, the amount of preparation and work, whether it's financial documents or legal documents, I want to appropriately get the sellers to realize that this is a serious business transaction and we're going to treat it like that. And so we need their participation in that, help with that too.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I love it. That's, it's important things. And, we see contractors just constantly kind of embarking on this journey, and then, new prospectors entering the space, every day, trying to learn and, drinking from a fire hose, just like we once were. So it's been a blast to get to work with so many contractors and to do so alongside you, Butch, and the passion that you bring, every day, and the energy and the attachment you get for your customers is a blast to see and be around. So it's a pleasure to have you on the webinar this week. I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for Q&A, because I know we're going to have folks on today that have various questions. We've already got a bunch of great questions loaded into the Q&A. So let's kind of transition over and dive into that, unless you have any other kind of final things that you want to make sure to share with our viewers today. Butch, anything else that's on your mind you want to make sure to cover?
No, we're great. We'll work it into Q&A.
All right. So before we jump in, and again, just as a reminder, if you're loading questions in still, the question today, we're just about to answer that. The question of the day is, what animal are you most afraid of? So what is that scary creature that you're like, just, gives you the heebie-jeebies? But before we do that, and then I'll answer, and you'll hear Butch answer as well, I want to hit you with the new inventory we had this week. So I've got 10 new listings that went live for you guys this week. Terre Haute, Indiana, 5 P&D routes listed at $595, strong margins. Operation is run by a really successful contractor, so you'd have great opportunity to learn there. It's going to be great for more of a hands-on buyer, just based on the size of that operation. Has spare drivers available, so kind of good from a contingency perspective too there in Terre Haute. In Lebanon, New Hampshire, we've got 5 P&D routes listed at $469. That opportunity has spare vehicles. It's a tenured, dedicated staff. Should help with making a really smooth transition there into the business. You've got a fleet that's really well curated for that specific business. So from an efficiency perspective, if fleet is something that's really a priority to you as you're shopping for the right businesses, might want to check out Lebanon, New Hampshire. In Indianapolis, Indiana, We've got 8 P&D routes listed at 1.1 million. Really solid 22+% operating margins, management, 7 spare vehicles, low stem mile territory, dense urban delivery area. So really, really beautiful opportunity there in Indy. Hartford, Vermont, we've got 6 P&D routes listed at 389. It's only 62% of revenue on that one. 3 spare vehicles, 10-year dedicated staff, great fleet, low stem miles. So great opportunity there up in Vermont. In Rockford, Illinois, I've got 9 P&D routes listed at 1.1 million, solid operating margins, 2 managers, 3 spare vehicles, 10-year contract or 2 that can be a great transition support and educational resource for you in Rockford. Ocala, Florida, if you want to go somewhere a little warmer, 10 P&D routes listed at 1.1 million, manager in place, 2 spare vehicles, assumable truck debt, high growth CSA, so a lot of opportunity there for some organic growth in Ocala. We've seen that historically too for that market. Kalamazoo, Michigan, 8 P&D routes listed at 600,000, has a manager, 4 spare vehicles, assumable truck debt, and great growth opportunity there in Kalamazoo. I've got 1 Amazon opportunity for you guys this week. Rochester, New York, 35 DSP routes listed at 1.85 million, 3 managers in place, solid margins, largest DSP in Rochester. So, great package density, clean, consistent financial records, full service leases there as is common with the Amazon model. So should be a really smooth transition into that one in Rochester. And then I've got 2 fire sales for you guys. We've got, it's basically a 2-piece. So we've got Huntsville, Alabama, kind of 2-part operation, 1 for 7 routes, 1 for 6 routes, both priced at about 30% of total revenue. So, 190,000 for one, 170,000 for the other. So definitely a dense delivery area, which is really a nice thing to see. So a lot of future potential there, especially with fuel costs where they are today. Dense delivery areas don't hurt, but a good kind of turnaround opportunity there in Huntsville. So for somebody looking in to get in at a lower capital injection and put a little bit of sweat equity into it, those would be a great opportunity to inquire about. So that's what I have for you guys this week. A ton of new opportunities all across the country. So hopefully you heard something there. That's what you've been waiting for. And if not, we will see you next week to talk about what's new. So question of the day, Butch, what is the scariest animal? I'm going to go first, then you go, and then we'll open it up for the audience. So I would say, and I feel like mine's not very unique or interesting this week, but it's like everybody, the spiders, the sharks, the snakes, and I actually love snakes. I love sharks, but spiders are the ones for me that are like, no, I absolutely am not okay with spiders. They're so scary. And I think it's just the fact that you can't see them. I feel like with a snake or a shark, once it's like, this is going to be a problem, they're right there and you can, easily react. But the spiders are the ones that I cannot stand.
Have you ever had a spider bite, Annalee? Have you ever been bitten by a spider?
So, you know what, and this may be where it comes from. So my mom told me that when I was a baby in my car seat, I actually got a spider bite as a baby. And so I think it was like a brown recluse bite. So my mom, freaked out, took me in the emergency room. I was fine, but I think that probably is where this, I don't remember it, but it's probably like a childhood trauma that I probably just never shook. So it's funny because I actually hadn't really made that connection until you asked me that, but you're right. That's probably why I'm scared of spiders. So
that's interesting. It also gives me a lot of insight into why your spidey senses are so good. Because if something's off in the room, Annalee, you're always the one who I can look over and you detect it immediately. Yeah, same look. I know that.
I'm a spider woman.
You got your spidey senses. I love it.
Wow, this went way better than I thought. I got a superpower. So
you didn't even know about it.
That's right. But so tell me, what animal are you most afraid of?
Well, this is a tough one for me, truthfully.
You're a hunter, you love them.
Yeah, I love the woods. I don't mind the ticks, the bugs, the anything. Nothing creeps me out really. So I guess let me think about this. Well, as a husband of 25 years and a father of a 23-year-old daughter, and working in this environment with a lot of young women, I think the thing that scares me the most, truly, would be a crying female Homo sapien. I cannot take it when a woman comes up to me in tears. So that sends chills down my spine. I'm sorry. That's the one that gets me. Crying female Homo sapien. Okay.
That's so sweet. That's the sweetest. Okay, you win. That's the best. That's the best answer. So we are scary, so I don't blame you.
Yeah, I just have trouble with that one, Annalee. I don't know why.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. Okay, so I have a ton of questions. They're rolling in now, so we're just going to dive right in. The first one, I can't see the name on this one. Oh, this is a good one. So the question here, or the fear is mosquitoes, which I can appreciate that. Those are pretty gnarly. So that's like a creative one. I didn't think of that. And then the question here is, Butch, and I'm happy to elaborate on this one too, you know, from a Hello Truck Lease perspective, which those of you not familiar with Hello Truck Lease, it is a P&D vehicle leasing platform that we have affiliated here at Route Consultant. Essentially, it's a program we wanted to find for years and never found. So we just created one to have a full service lease on the P&D side. The question here, though, is do we have any plans to add semi trucks to the Hello Truck Lease program? But you know, I would say in the near to medium term, definitely not on the line haul space. We've probably got more than we can handle just trying to keep up on the P&D side for a long time because it's so needed and it just doesn't exist on the P&D side. Question here, I was also asking, you know, would Ryder and Penske basically be the two best places to start? I would say yes. We've had the most luck with Ryder over the years on kind of the full service lease option on the line haul side. So I would say that's definitely your best place to start. And then follow-up question was with the chip shortage, any idea when that's going to, you know, stop becoming such an availability issue? And, you know, no. Have you heard anything, Butch, on, I'm still hearing that as a pretty long-term problem. I think, you know, tractor scarcity is going to be a challenge at least for the next 18 to 24 months, if not longer, but that's kind of the horizon I'm still seeing.
Absolutely. And I would throw in Gator and Volvo, or a couple more of the lease options that we've seen success with. And I know contractors have given me good feedback with. Yeah. Regarding the Hello Truck Lease, I know we are looking at some 700s, I think, and some 1200s, but I don't think anything on the long haul line haul side. So
that's right. Yep. But expanding the sizes on the P&D side is definitely in the immediate future for us. So great question. Next question comes from Steve Manor, who said snakes are his least favorite animal. I can appreciate that. Snakes are cool, you know, and I think it's like one zoo visit with a boa constrictor and you're like, okay, these are kind of cool, but also still terrible. So
yes, I agree. I'm not a huge fan of snakes. Not a huge fan of snakes.
Not as scary as us ladies, though. So the question here, I definitely figured we would talk about this one a little bit. I would expect Spencer to address this one in detail here coming up soon on a special webinar. But and Butch, we may not have even covered this yet, because this is really new information. But on the new Schedule L announcement that just came out from FedEx Ground, I'm happy to talk about this one just a little bit. So basically, the question here is, you know, what are our thoughts on this? You know, do we think it's going to, you know, lower contractor margins? Just as a really high level summary. And again, this is all coming out kind of in real time, but FedEx has basically just announced two major changes. You know, one, that essentially there is going to be now a safety, both bonus and a disincentive for operators based on their safety score and percentages on the safety side. So we're looking at, you know, for contractors, basically a swing on your current revenue projections, you know, where you've got sort of a 1 to 3%, you know, upside downside, it would appear based on, you know, how you're scoring safety wise. I think you're probably maxed out about 1% incentive on your revenue, but, you know, it can go as low as a 3% penalty on your revenue if you're hitting those really low safety performance scores. And then they're also raising the accident indemnification. So historically, we've been at 2,000, and it's going to increase to 5,000 on that, the potential liability for contractors in an indemnity situation. So, yeah, this is new information. I think, you know, obviously, so for contractors that have impeccable safety track records, this could increase their margins, right? As they see a 1% bump to their revenue, all other cost components being the same, that's obviously going to net out in an increased margin. For the vast majority of contractors, you know, within that mid bracket, it'd be expected that it's going to be a net neutral and not change the margin. And then again, if you're just having accidents, you could see a little bit of that $2,000, a $3,000 additional premium on the accident liability. But the potential downside for a contractor that falls into that lower safety score ranking, could be significant. A 3% margin in today's climate, where you have fuel pressure, wage pressure, inflation pressure, every truck pricing pressure, like everything you can imagine. Margins, I think it could be extremely painful for some contractors. So, we're devastated, with that announcement right now, just in terms of a kind of one more straw on the camel's back in a really tough season. But you can see from this, obviously, FedEx's commitment to, really applying pressure on the safety conversation. They're obviously facing and waging that battle on a lot of fronts and trying to keep up with claims and liability, on their end, just from the accident side. And so, it makes sense in terms of the why. I think the timing is really unfortunate. And, I think for a lot of contractors, it could be, again, extremely painful. There's a lot of speculation that it's kind of, we're just continuing to see pressure on the contractor base to basically, weed out anybody who's not falling in that top performer range. Basically just if you're falling in those ranges, that's going to be questionable safety performance from FedEx's perspective. This makes it, harder to sustain. And so it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. The timing is challenging. I think for a lot of operators, this is going to be painful, but, hopefully, as we commit to safety and as we rely on a lot of the new vendors and the things that Butch was talking about in the opener, and just support solutions and hopefully things that help us reduce the probability of accidents, maybe for some of us, we'll see a potential increase in our revenues from this, but it's definitely a painful one. So.
Yeah, it's by far been a massive focus of FedEx safety. I mean, and we've seen it across the board with the technology they're requiring to be rolled out and the timelines, and safety as people, contractors run these businesses, is probably the most important component to FedEx is how safety is approached for contractors.
I think that's right. And it's a constant battle. We, a lot of times refer to it for our consulting clients as sort of the sleeping giant, and I think that the sleeping giant just got more giant, for contractors, is that this is the one that if you don't mind safety, it's not as in your face daily, but it can have really, really painful consequences on contract viability and the cost creep with as you have accidents and claims. But this is just going to really increase the pain and the feeling on those incidents. And so, again, it was a sleeping giant already, but it's now wields a bigger weapon. So.
But the tools that are available for contractors to monitor and improve safety are really far and away different than they were even a year or so ago. I mean, the ability to get real-time feedback on what your drivers are doing in the truck at any given moment, that just didn't exist a couple of years ago. So having the ability, and our best contractors, the people that I work with, who do the best job on safety, they use that technology as coaching opportunities. So they get out in front of accidents by being in front of it and saying, hey, look, here's some best practices that I see you're deviating from, and we're just not going to let these practices continue. So having that culture of safety, the meetings weekly, using the technology available to create coaching opportunities, that's the way contractors who are successful with safety are approaching it.
Absolutely. All right, next question comes from Faraz Kaisi, who said, I'm not afraid, but I do get disgusted by snakes. So I love that. He's like, I'm not afraid, but just a little put off by snakes. And the question is, what is the average pay for a line haul manager? So I'm happy to kind of touch on that a little bit. Is, really, and it's going to vary obviously in today's labor market, and it's going to vary on the size of the operation that they're managing for sure. So, somebody dispatching two tractors, and I think a question too, like whether they're driving or if they're truly just dispatching is going to be different. But, I would say a decent size, he said 9 routes in the chat, but I'd say a decent size kind of line haul operations manager, I think you could see them average out in like the mid 70s, but I think, there'd be situations where, that can be a much higher compensated employee, again, depending on how engaged, how involved they are. So do you see anything different than that, Butch, and just in terms of looking at the businesses?
Most of the time, your line haul managers make a little less than the drivers, actually. And for the ones who are going to do and to make more money, they really need to be willing to drive. In a line haul operation, the cardinal sin is to turn down runs. So if you've got a manager who's managing that business, they need to be able to get in the truck and not decline runs. That's what makes a line haul manager. Now, the other thing that I know makes a really good line haul manager is their relationship with their dispatcher, right? Because having that human in the building to help manage that customer relationship, that's also how you help grow your line haul business and protect your line haul business. So it does depend on geography. It depends on the number of runs. It depends on whether they will drive. And then there's the intangibles around, how's their relationship with my line haul manager and dispatch.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question comes from Ryan Catapano, who said, flying spiders give him the creeps. So that is a creepy one. I guess I don't encounter them very often, but it's like you just took my fear and then you gave it wings. So yes, this is not, I don't know if they have wings. I think they just jump mostly, but
yeah. I think they just ride the wind, Annalee. That's what I think. I found a windy day, they just ride the wind, and wherever they go, they go.
It's pretty terrible. So the question from Ryan is, can we confirm that for P&D operators that they can be exempt from sales tax on the purchase of new vehicles? They just, submit a sheet with FedEx's DOT number. It seems too easy. Love to know the feedback. So you want to take that one, Butch? Or?
Sure, absolutely. And that's a state by state issue. Different states have different laws and rules around sales tax for your vehicles. And so depending upon where you may or may not have a domiciled geography, where you have a physical address relative to where your business is, there are ways to get around paying state sales tax, even in most states that would normally require it, but it requires you to set up some things in another state. So it is, yes, the answer is yes, you can do it, but it also does create some unique challenges around the registration of your vehicles.
Absolutely.
Is that fair enough? Is that a fair enough way to put it?
That's right. It's not an easy process. But it does depend on state. So it's very weight class, state specific. The best way to get information is if you'll just go to your CPA and let them know that you want to do some research on your state eligibility for a rolling stock exemption. That's the best way to let them kind of look into that process for you and see what you're going to be eligible for in your state. Okay. Next question comes from Daryl Kelly, who said, rats. I love it. It's specified here, specifically New York City rats. Those are the nasty ones. They're huge. He said, so I'm like,
he's right. I've wandered the streets of New York at about 1 a.m. and it's a different place. The rats are everywhere. It's really amazing at night. The rats in New York do come out in a big way, and they're not small, Annalee. They're very large.
No. Okay. You might, I don't know. That might give my spiders a run for their money. That sounds pretty terrible. So
yes.
The question here, so we talked about in the past, our first routes were actually Springfield, Illinois, right outside Chicago, and said, basically when Spencer purchased, he spent the first month, there in Springfield, and then, came back to Nashville. How did he run it from that distance? Since that basically would be remote, what was he tracking, to keep it operating? So, I think both of us could probably tell this story. We've done it so many times, but, definitely, and it was not by choice. I'd say he had probably intended to spend a little time there, but then our manager quit right after he closed on the first set of routes. And so it was a less optional presence on site for that first month. But at the end of the day, running one of these businesses remote is all about your BC. That at the end of the day, that is what it comes down to. So, from a kind of what were we managing perspective, ultimately it was the performance of that BC. So, obviously the big thing we're usually looking at is a BC's ability to control payroll as a percentage of weekly revenue. That is ultimately going to attribute to all your profitability. It's a great indicator, again, of just that basic contingency planning and daily management. Obviously managing service, we used to live by the daily service worksheet, still do. But as again, when we were talking about in the opener with the sophistication of technology, there's way prettier dashboards now that automate so much of this information to make those critical metrics easy to manage on a weekly basis, but tried and true. You can always look at the daily service worksheet daily as it's coming in, managing service, managing safety, but really, I think that percentage of revenue on payroll is the other really big one. If you're trying to get to that stage of the BC, we've got the BC training course. That's always a great way to get a BC trained, and they cover a lot, like what major metrics our BC operations managers rely on, and what they manage throughout the day. So that's a great resource too. But those would be some of the tips and tricks there. Next question, let's see, comes from, oops, I scrolled down too fast. So John Webb, this is a good question. We may have to do a little digging on this one. So he said, animals aren't really a big fear thing for him, but if there was one, it would probably be spiders. So he's looking for some more macro feedback here with so many economists pointing to, potential recessions, wants to know just kind of how are we adjusting our planning and management from that perspective with potential, talk of a recession. And then also asking on the DSP side, how did DSP contractors fare in the last recession? So, happy to kind of speak to a couple of those. And then Butch, this is your role too, so jump in as much as you want. But I think really the big thing for us, and this is again why I think we've seen a lot of contractors selling off, pieces of their business, is I think raising capital and deleveraging is generally one of the most important pieces in kind of anticipation for a recession. Because the beautiful thing about these businesses, and I'll speak to the FedEx side first, is that we're very recession resistant. And it's not that we're recession proof, but we're very recession resistant as an industry. And the main reason being is that as consumer demand drops, if we see that reduce, it's easy to reduce the size of operations, right? So you can easily scale down drivers and scale down vehicles to be able to, run whatever's efficient and optimal. We change the number of routes we're running on a daily basis. So as demand changes, yes, our revenue is going to come down, but we can pull expenses down in an extremely correlated manner to control that margin. But where you typically don't have scale down ability is on debt service, right? Or truck payments. And so, deleveraging is one of the best ways to brace for a potential recession, because that's going to give you staying power. And a lot of people, won't have that if they are over leveraged. So that'd be the biggest tip. In terms of how the DSPs did, I don't think they really existed during the last recession. So, we're going to see that, and it I imagine would be, I would expect somewhat comparable, right? Because in the same way, they have that flex up, flex down ability. But it's an unknown. FedEx, we fared very well and saw, rather than aggressive growth, we saw sort of stagnation in growth. We didn't actually see any decline during the last recession. We just saw a slowdown of growth. But it'll be interesting to see, how DSPs, fare during that experience. So anything I missed there?
A couple things I want to add. One is, we did not historically see in the last recession a decline in revenues. That could theoretically come, but a lot of the cost pressures that currently exist in these businesses today would certainly dissipate in an economic recession. Labor costs would go down dramatically. Fuel prices would go down dramatically. So if we were to enter a real recession, the cost side of the equation would go down significantly for running these businesses too. Not just from scaling, but literally the cost of fuel, the cost of trucks, the cost of labor, all of those things would decline relative to where they are today too.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question comes from Yvette Warman, who said, grasshoppers are her animal of fear. They are kind of creepy, but I never really considered grasshoppers. Like, I think the praying mantis is also kind of creepy. But
I used to love catching grasshoppers as a kid. We would chase them around and catch them, but then they would like drool on you. That little brown juice they would come out with because of all the grass that they had chewed up. They would secrete this brown stuff as a way to try to get, like, let them go. But They were the best fishing bait. I used to fish with grasshoppers all the time. It was so fun.
Gosh, you heard it here first, folks. Grasshopper drool on the Route Consultant weekly webinar. Oh, that's so nasty. That is great. That's a new thing on grasshoppers. Question from Yvette is, are we finding the value of routes, decreasing as the price of gas is increasing? And, we've got stop pressures, we're, leveling out some of that growth, even some declines in some markets. But what would you say there on kind of valuations, Butch?
A couple things. One is the time for these transactions to occur takes a little bit of time. So you don't see instantaneous declines in the market overnight due to cost pressures. It could weave its way into valuations over the next couple of quarters, but we're not seeing anything now. And I will tell you, my most savvy buyers realize that they should be buying and making investments when the news in the streets are poor. And so a lot of investors who are approaching this space, who are well capitalized, who want to get into a growing space, this as a growth investor is the perfect environment to enter in. So no, we're not seeing a significant decline in valuations, maybe in 2 or 3 quarters, but the most savvy investors I see right now are loving what they're hearing about contractors who are arguing with FedEx over pricing, because to buyers, this is the right time to enter the space. And you always want to buy from an investment perspective when there's bad news out there. And so, no, we're not seeing any significant decline yet.
Yeah. This is actually not a question. I was just going to add this. It's a great call out. We were talking about rolling stock exemption earlier. Jim Lahusek said, and I just wanted to read his because it's cool. He said his is orcas or killer whales are his most feared. And that's a good one too. If you watch that, I can't remember the documentary now, but yeah, that was really intense. But he was just throwing out that the rolling stock exemption, one more reminder for that too, it's a great call out, is it's not just state by state, but the weight class requirements have a significant importance there too. So, different states, Illinois, 16,000 pounds, Tennessee, I think it's 10,000 pounds. Ohio doesn't have a weight limitation. So it's going to vary a little bit state to state there, but it's a good call out there on the weight class of the vehicles. Next question comes from Tina Dungy, who said also rats for her. So that's a number 2. And the question is, so kind of where they are, they've taken a really aggressive approach to recruiting, constantly recruiting, never stop. So they actually are now kind of reaching a point where the challenge is they have more drivers than they actually need. Said, they're growing, they're trying to acquire additional routes, but they're just carrying a lot of drivers on payroll. And, wanted to know if we had any thoughts on how to basically juggle that. They've got low turnover because they're paying high, offering benefits. I can imagine how that's hitting, your margins, but just thoughts on how to juggle that. So I've got a couple. Do you have any thoughts on that, Butch, you want to go with?
Why don't you start and I'll augment it.
So, I would say kind of a couple things. One of them, and there's actually, I believe it was Route Elite was telling me about this at one of our summits this last time. So they've got a new feature that is pretty cool, where it's basically giving the option for the drivers to kind of put their preferred work schedule in. So we a lot of times kind of set drivers on these kind of assumed schedules of, hey, you're Monday through Friday, you're Tuesday to Saturday, you're, Saturday, Sunday only, whatever it is. But they have a little bit more dynamic of a scheduling system, which basically allows the drivers on a week-to-week basis to say, hey, I want this day off. I want to work this day. And they said, basically what they're seeing is that you get a lot more kind of voluntary days off that way, where they might want to be at a birthday party or be at a, family function or have a doctor's appointment or something, that when they have a little more flexibility, you can kind of shed some payroll where it feels a little more voluntary. And I think that's one great way if you're trying to just hold the line and carry that extra staff. Obviously, a lot of times our driver, base and driver demographic are week to week on paychecks. So a lot of times they're not willing, to take a pay cut if they can't work a particular day. And so I get that that's challenging, but there's kind of no magic sauce on how to carry the payroll without using it. I think if you've got people that are cross-trained that you can use on repair and maintenance and, try to leverage in other ways, that can be a good tool as well. Cultivating, backup managers. And then, I think at the end of the day, I would start trying to network with other contractors in my market to see if they need some drivers in the short term. Because a lot of times, if you've got a great recruiting strategy, if you can get somebody else to just carry the payroll, they may not pay as well for the day, but at least it gets the driver working, and that helps you lighten your payroll load a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Annalee. I mean, there's usually a contractor somewhere who needs a driver on almost any given day in the terminal. So getting to know them and doing someone a favor is a great way to expect someone to someday return that favor for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question is Wendy Richards, who also said snakes for sure. She said, oh no, she said, I've been bit and it's not awesome.
Oh, that's not good. No.
That's a story. I'm interested in the story, Wendy, but it doesn't sound like that was a very pleasant experience. So question.
That would make me afraid of snakes too. If one had bit me, I think I'd then be afraid.
I think so too. The question here is there a checklist or a guide to basically evaluating a fleet when you're buying? Or, Butch, how do you look at that when you're helping a contractor evaluate, or a potential contractor evaluate a fleet?
There's a couple different things. High level. First is you're just going to want to do an overall assessment in your mind. If you're buying a fleet where everything's under warranty, how much money do you really need to spend evaluating that fleet, right? So that's very different if you're buying a fleet that it consists of 5 to 10-year-old vehicles. And so take a look at what you're buying and think about how much money you want to invest in that process, because the way we usually counsel people to do that is be prepared to rent a truck for the contractor to use as you take one of their trucks out of service on a daily basis, to go through all of the things that you're going to want to look at. And so you can get as granular as oil analysis and fluid analysis. Some people literally just do a glance or a cursory physical look at the truck. Some people bring in their mechanics and they really want to look under the hoods and dig into it. So it depends on the fleet. I would always recommend, no matter what, unless it's a brand new fleet, to get it inspected with an independent mechanic, because you just don't need surprises when you stand up in one of these businesses. And if you have problems, then there's ways to deal with that on the front end, leave a little bit of money in escrow till the trucks get fixed. In today's market, it's taking longer and longer for broken vehicles to get fixed simply because it's hard to find parts. So doing your inspections and understanding the fleet that you're going to inherit is critical to knowing what your challenges are going to be week 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, so we've been going almost a full hour. We're going to do 2 more questions as a wrap up. One more thing, just want to point out. So we are going to be in California. If any of you are on the West Coast or want to come out for some sunshine on the West Coast and see us, we have been so wanting to do this California roadshow and have just been waiting for things to lighten up to the point where we could get out there and visit some of you. So we are on April 27th. So that's in about 2 weeks. We're going to be doing a happy hour at the Beans Route headquarters in Northern California. It's in Palo Alto, I believe. So that's going to be for FedEx contractors and Amazon contractors, just to come have a happy hour at their facility network. We'll be there in person to meet, get to know each other, answer any questions you have. Then about 2 days later, on April 29th, we're going to be in San Diego in Southern California, doing a full-blown educational roadshow for contractors that want to come and learn about, again, some of the tips and the ways that we are navigating, tighter margin pressures right now, and some of the challenges that we're facing in the market, how we're navigating around those things. And we're also going to have a ride and drive with Exos. If you want to demo an electric vehicle, that's going to be really cool. You can pre-register, because that's totally going to fill up on the ride and drive. So pre-register for that. But basically would love to see you guys in California here in about 2 weeks. Super excited to be out there, get some sunshine, and talk a little bit about some of the things we've covered here today in more detail. So last 2 questions really fast. Thank you guys again for being here this week. This one comes from Ian Forwood, who said, I'm married to a Marine. He said his fear is an enemy troop operating a mortar that knows where you are located. So that's way scarier than women.
Yes,
way scarier than women, Ian. So you win.
You win, Ian.
That's right. So the question from Ian is just, in the scarcity market that we're seeing on vehicles, could you see a case for buying a business and just running rental trucks if you can't get a fleet right now, and basically waiting out the truck market until you can afford to purchase vehicles?
I would really rather you buy a business where we can employ Hello Truck lease vehicles, because we have trucks, and it's really, really hard to make any money running these businesses with rental trucks on the P&D side. So that is really not recommended. I would be a little more selective in your outlook of businesses, and try to find something that either has a decent fleet or qualifies for something where you can get trucks.
Yeah. Last question comes from Lauren Kuda, who said she lived in Arizona for 16 years. Oh, this is a good one. Oh, these are so terrible. This question was scorpions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, don't look under that rock. Just be careful. Yeah.
No, scorpions, that's terrible. So the question was, we talk all the time and we say, buy a good business at a fair price. She's looking at an operation where the payroll as a percentage of revenue is way higher than what we typically recommend. Is that an automatic no-go for a first-time contractor, Butch?
Absolutely not. It's not an automatic no-go. As a matter of fact, if I had to make a recommendation, I would rather see you buy an overstaffed business than an understaffed business. It is way easier to trim payroll than it is to build payroll quickly. So in an overstaffed operation, you will have the opportunity to come in and have a heart-to-heart sit down with the entire group of drivers and say, look, we appreciate everything you've done, but we're going to be changing things a little bit culturally. And so you can change expectations and keep your best drivers and slowly weed out some of the underperformers. That is a vastly superior scenario to buying a business that is light on payroll and a driver or two quits early on and you're playing catch up with First Advantage. So don't be afraid of a little bit extra payroll. It gives you really some flexibility in how you run that business and grow that business. So way would rather see you err on the side of buying a nice business with a little more payroll, because you can fix that problem pretty easily.
Yeah. And the only two things I would just add to that is that, making sure you go into it with the mindset that it's going to put margin pressure, right? So right out of the gate, like making sure you've got capital reserves and working capital allocated to buy you the time you need to do that payroll cleanup. But the cleanup itself is not something I'm intimidated by. It can be done. It just takes a little time, but having the capital reserves is important. And then just make sure you don't have that conversation about changing the culture and trimming down payroll the first week, right? Give them a couple weeks, keep everything stable, and then you can start making those rollouts and those shifts. So
thank you, Annalee. Absolutely.
Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us this week, Butch. It was such a blast to have you here on the webinar. So excited to get to bring you to the stage and let everybody get to know you a little bit better. So appreciate you guys for being here. We will see you all same time, same place next week. So take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Annalee.